Everyone in crypto talks about market cap, like it tells you everything that you need to know about a digital asset. But what if I told you that market cap is actually one of the worst ways to measure real strength of a digital asset? Over the last year, I've been working on a white paper for something I call the liquidity index. Liquidity index is an equation designed to measure the true utility and stability of a digital asset, not just the price, but the real mechanics of liquidity. Because real liquidity isn't just one variable, it's a system, and it requires 6 different components. It's the depth of a market, the continuity of liquidity in a market, the cost of moving that capital or the slippage, the available supply, the speed at which it can actually settle, and the access you actually have to be able to use that digital asset. When you start measuring these 6 components together, something fascinating appears. The assets that will power the next financial system can't just be volatile speculation. They actually require a high, stable price in order to function at a global scale. So in this video, I'm going to make it simple for you to understand each piece behind the equation, and at the end of it, you can comment liquidity index below, and it'll get you a free version of the white paper. So let's get into it. So the first piece of this is really kind of supply and demand. There's 2 components to available supply. There's a piece that is like the total amount of the token, and there's also what's available to be traded. So think about Pokemon cards as an example. Imagine there's somebody that holds, 100 of these rare Charizards. There's actually a guy that has this, right? And it drives the price of those Charizards up because there's a concentration of supply. He wants them and other people want them, and because of that, he can kind of drive price in a market. So if there's only 100 that were ever printed, just pretend with me for a second, and no more coming ever, which again, there's a finite supply of the original Charizards. Now, imagine that the collector walks up and somebody else wants to buy 50 of those in one shot. That's half the global supply of these Charizards, gone with one person's collection. So what happens to the price of the remaining 50 Charizards if somebody buys 50 from the guy that has the 100? The cards haven't changed, it's the same card, but because now there's fewer of them that are available on the market to be sold, the same number of collectors still want them, there's scarcity, and that drives the price up. That's the first piece of what's happening with XRP and these payment networks. Fixed supply, growing demand, and the remaining cards get more valuable. The next piece is where it gets interesting, and this is the part that most people completely miss. It's the depth of a market. So let's say there's a giant bank, call it JP Morgan, and they want to move $100 million from one country to another, and they want to use XRP to do it. Think of XRP's market like a swimming pool or a large pond. The water in the pool is the money that's available to absorb that trade. If the pool is shallow, like in the kiddie pool, and a 200-pound adult cannonballs into that, what happens? Well, water goes everywhere, and it's a total mess. Everyone around the pool gets soaked, and that's what happens to the price when massive banks try to push $100 million through a thin market. The price crashes. But if the pool is the size of a lake or an Olympic swimming pool, and it's deep and full of water, the same cannonball barely makes a splash. The water absorbs it. The price stays stable. So the question is, how do you make the pool deeper? The lever for that is got to be price. Here's the thing about XRP and other payment networks. The number of tokens are fixed. There are only so many of them, so they can't print more of them. It doesn't work like the Federal Reserve printing dollars. So if the pool stays the same size, there's the same number of tokens. The only way that they can make that liquidity deeper is to make each token worth more. Think about it this way. If XRP is worth $1 each, and you need to move $100 million to the network, you need 100 million tokens sitting in the pool ready to be able to absorb that trade. That's a lot. But as the pool gets larger, and let's say XRP is worth $100 each, you only need 1 million tokens to absorb the same $100 million trade. Same number of dollars moving, way less stress on the pool. Price is able to stay more stable. So same supply of tokens, higher price for each token, deeper liquidity. The banks will actually start using it when that's the case. And that's not speculation, that's arithmetic. The price has to be higher for these networks to do what they're designed to do. So let's talk about slippage. When that guy jumps in the pool, and it's a thin market and water goes everywhere, that's similar to the slippage. Slippage means you try to buy or sell something at one price, but you end up getting the worst price because your order is too big for the market to handle cleanly. Here's the best way to picture it. Imagine a garage sale. A guy has, call it 100 vinyl records, and he's got them priced all at $1. Well, you start coming over and you start grabbing them, right? First couple he sells for $1, but as he sees that you have more demand and more interest, he starts raising the price on you because he knows you're willing to pay it. You went in expecting to pay $100 for all those records, but now you ended up spending like $250 and you didn't even get all the records. That's called slippage. Your big order moves the price against what you want. So for big banks, slippage is a major problem. Right now, if banks tried to push $100 million through XRP, they would lose somewhere around 10% just because of slippage. That's $10 million just gone. Nobody's going to do that. But in traditional stock markets, moving $100 million costs them less than half of 1%. So right now, crypto loses that comparison poorly, right? It's no contest. There's not enough liquidity. But to close the gap, it's really just straight math. The value sitting on the order books needs to grow by something like 20 to 100 times. And since the number of tokens can't grow, the price of the token has to do all of that work. So here's where it really gets interesting. Not only does the price need to go up for these networks to function, but on top of that, the available token supply is shrinking. Well, there's actually a burn rate for sending transactions on the network, but that's a small amount, right? Like XRP will be around for 50,000 years, the current burn rate. But what I'm talking about is things that are locking up that XRP or other digital assets and holding them out of the available supply to be able to settle. So let's talk about ETFs. When companies like Grayscale or Franklin Templeton launch an XRP ETF, they buy tokens and they lock them up in cold storage. These tokens do not trade anymore. They are taken off the market. They cannot be used to settle transactions. Second, banks and companies that want to use the network for real business, moving money across borders, settling trades back into markets, they're going to hold these as inventory. The tokens that they're holding aren't going to be sitting on exchanges waiting to be bought. They're going to be locked up doing work. And then lastly, you've got DeFi protocols, liquidity pools, AMMs, other things that people are going to be putting these digital assets into. People are going to lock up into, call it a lending pool, or another pool that returns yield for them. Same thing. These tokens are off the market. They're not going to be providing liquidity for transactions. So demand is going up. More institutions want in, more real world use cases are turning on, and supply is going down at the same time. The tokens that are actually available to buy on an exchange are shrinking fast. When demand goes up and supply goes down, guess what happens? The price doesn't slide up gradually, it jumps, it gaps up, because at some point there just aren't enough sellers and buyers have to pay whatever the next sellers are willing to sell at. That's not a prediction based on vibes, it's how actual markets work. So there's a couple more things we still need to get through. One of those is speed. XRP settles every 3 to 5 seconds. Bitcoin takes, half an hour to an hour. Ethereum somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. Imagine a bank teller who could serve one customer every half hour, and then there's another one that can serve a customer every 5 seconds. The fast teller, with the same amount of money in their drawer, can serve hundreds of customers in the same time. The money in the drawer is still doing the same work, but it's 100 times more than what the other person can do. That's the power of fast settlement that these networks have. The same pool of money can handle more volume because it recycles it so fast. A market maker with $10 million working on XRP could theoretically support billions of dollars in daily volume. The same market maker on Bitcoin or one of these other networks might be able to support a couple $100 million because of the latency. But this is the important piece. Speed only helps if the pool's deep enough in the first place. If every single trade costs you 1 to 2% in slippage, the speed advantage turns into a faster way to lose money. So you have to have speed and price together in order for this to actually work. And the last piece, and what many would argue we're still waiting on, is access to these assets. Until recently, banks couldn't touch crypto even if they wanted to. There was too much legal risk and no clear frameworks. That changed in July of 2025 when the US government passed the first crypto act called the Genius Act. And it basically said stable coins and other networks are legal to run on. There were rules and banks could participate. And here in the near future, we should see the Clarity Act. That's still working its way through Congress, but if it passes, US banks could actually hold XRP, AVAX, HBAR, maybe even Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And that's not a side bet, it's an actual asset on their balance sheet if they're given the ability to do so. So when the door opens, the pool's going to get a lot deeper with a lot more money very quickly. And remember, these tokens that the banks are buying are coming off the market. More buying pressure, less available supply. So let's bring it back to basics. Market cap tells you what a network would be worth if you could sell every single token at the last price it traded. It doesn't tell you what actually happens when banks try to move real money through these networks. And that's my argument. If you're looking at it like a stock, it's a protocol. It's something very different. What actually matters is, can the network handle real institutional payment volumes without destroying capital through slippage? Right now, for most of these networks, the answer is no, not yet. But here's where the math tells us it's going. For these networks that work the way that they're supposed to, they could actually replace SWIFT to move money trillions of dollars across borders. Price per token has to reach levels that make these order books deep enough for them to be able to absorb that volume first, though. And that's not a prediction, that's a structural requirement. The price doesn't have to go up because of hype, it has to go up because the system doesn't function otherwise. Fixed supply, growing demand, tokens leaving the market, fast settlement, waiting for depth to catch up. The math points one direction, and that's the thesis. So if you found value in this, again, please like, subscribe. Thank you for taking the time to watch. And if you do want the free white paper, just comment liquidity index in the comments below. And we'll see you on the next one.